Welcome to the Living Messiah channel. Tonight, we will enter a journey of peace. If you are looking for Bible stories for sleep, you have come to the right place. Modern life brings many anxieties. The storms in our hearts never stop blowing. Therefore, this video is a Christian sleep meditation made just for you. It belongs to our series of biblical stories for anxiety and stress. It will help you find quietness in your soul. Today, we will reflect on a great event. It is the miraculous account of Jesus calms the storm. You will witness the awe-inspiring power of calming the raging storm. This is a perfect Jesus calms the storm bedtime story, a spiritual tranquilizer from the scriptures. This script is also helpful for those who want to practice English listening through Bible stories, a perfect Bible audio stories experience to calm your mind. Let your body relax. Take a deep breath in. Exhale slowly. Close your eyes. We are stepping into a 30-minute Bible story for sleep, one of the greatest Jesus miracles ever recorded. The Sea of Galilee is a paradox of nature. It rests deeply in the Jordan Rift Valley. It sits nearly 700 feet below sea level. This body of water is a picture of contradictions. 1 minute, it can reflect the light of heaven. The very next minute, it can unleash the fury of the abyss. Surrounding the lake are rolling hills. To the east are steep, towering cliffs. This geography creates a perfect trap for sudden weather events. Cold air masses from the mountains frequently rush down. They plunge down the narrow slopes. They violently collide with the warm air trapped in the valley below. When these winds collide, they do not merely blow. They strike. They hit the surface of the lake like a giant hammer. They churn the water into a chaotic frenzy. For generations, the fishermen of Capernaum knew this truth. The sea was their livelihood. The sea was their provider. But the sea was never their friend. It was a wild, untamed beast. It demanded absolute respect. Yet, on this particular evening, everything was different. The water was as flat as hammered copper. It reflected the dying embers of a Judean sun. There was no omen in the sky. There was no warning in the wind. There was only the gentle lapping of water against timber, a sound hiding the profound event that was about to unfold. Tonight would be the great Sea of Galilee miracle, a night that would completely shift the disciples' understanding. They would witness unprecedented power. The sun had been relentless all day. It beat down upon the western shores of the lake. A heavy heat surrounded the massive crowd. Thousands had gathered. They pressed in from every side. It was a crushing tide of humanity, desperate for a word, desperate for a touch, desperate for a miracle. There were mothers holding sick infants. There were men with hollow, hopeless eyes. There were also skeptics standing with crossed arms. Jesus of Nazareth had spent the entire day teaching. The crowd was simply too dense. He was forced to step into a small fishing boat. He pushed out a few yards from the shoreline. The water amplified his voice like a natural theater. This event is beautifully detailed in the Gospel of Mark, specifically in the passage of Mark 4:35 through 41. He told the story of the sower. He spoke of the tiny mustard seed growing into a large tree. His voice was the anchor for thousands of weary souls. But Jesus was fully human. Beneath his divine authority lay a physical reality, a body pushed to its absolute limits. His energy had poured out continually. His throat was parched. His muscles ached.
A profound, heavy exhaustion settled over his frame. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the sky turned a deep purple. Jesus looked at the multitude. He looked out across the vast water. He turned to his disciples. His voice was quiet but absolute. "Let us go across to the other side," he said. There was no debate. The disciples immediately dismissed the crowds. They pulled up the anchor stone and prepared the rigging. They took him in the boat, just as he was. They left at once, without even taking time to gather provisions.
The noise of the shoreline quickly faded behind them. It was replaced by the rhythmic quiet of the open water. The disciples maneuvered the vessel. It was a heavy working boat made of oak and cedar, roughly 27 feet long, built to withstand heavy loads of fish. Peter, James, and John moved with synchronized grace. They were men who had spent their entire lives on these waters. They hoisted the square sail. They caught a gentle evening breeze. The wind pushed them steadily eastward. The wooden hull creaked a familiar, comforting tune. Jesus sought a quiet corner. He made his way to the stern of the boat. There lay a small leather cushion. It was typically used for weary sailors to rest their heads. He lay down. The gentle rocking of the boat, the rhythmic splashing of the water, combined with sheer physical depletion, it all acted as a powerful lullaby. Within moments, he was in a deep, impenetrable sleep. This is the beautiful image of Jesus sleeping in the storm that we will soon witness. The first hour passed peacefully. The disciples conversed in low, hushed tones. They were careful not to wake their sleeping master. They discussed the parables of the day. They enjoyed the cool relief of the evening air. The stars began to prick through the dark canvas of the sky. It was a picture of perfect peace. But far away, in the deep eastern ravines, the air was shifting. A cold front was moving rapidly. It plunged down the cliffs like an invisible avalanche.
It began not with a sound. It began with a sudden, chilling drop in temperature, a bone-chilling cold. Peter was standing near the tiller. He felt the hairs on his arms stand up. He looked toward the eastern horizon. The stars were vanishing. They were swallowed by a massive, inky blackness. The darkness spread across the sky at an unnatural speed. "Drop the sail!" Peter barked. His voice was sharp. It shattered the quiet camaraderie on the deck. Andrew and James scrambled forward. But before their hands could reach the ropes, the wind hit them. It was a physical blow, a solid wall of moving air. It violently tipped the heavy wooden boat onto its side. The sail snapped taut. It made a sound like a cracking whip. The mast groaned in agony under the immense pressure. This was no ordinary squall. The biblical text uses a very strong word. It was a literal earthquake of the sea. The flat water instantly erupted into chaotic, towering waves. The event of calming the raging storm had officially begun. The wind howled through the rigging, a high-pitched, terrifying shriek. It drowned out the shouts of the men. It tore the tops off the waves. It filled the air with blinding, stinging salt water. Visibility dropped to mere feet. The disciples were plunged into a disorienting and chaotic darkness.
Pure panic seized the crew. They were not novices. They were men who had navigated storms on this lake since their youth. But this storm was completely different. The waves were not just rolling, they were crossing. They were colliding, they were exploding from every direction. A massive wall of black water crashed over the bow. It slammed into the deck with the weight of solid stone. The boat shuddered violently. It slid down a deep trough of water. Then it was violently thrust upward again. "Bail! Bail the water!" someone screamed. The disciples grabbed whatever they could, clay jars, leather buckets, even cupping their bare hands. They frantically scooped the freezing water and hurled it over the side.
But it was useless. For every bucket they threw out, 2 more waves crashed in. The heavy wooden boat was losing its buoyancy. The sea was claiming it. The wind pinned them to the deck. No one could stand. Lightning tore across the sky. The flashes illuminated a horrific scene. Terrified, soaked faces, splintering wood, foaming black mountains of water towering above their heads. But through all of that raging storm, Jesus slept. He was at the stern. The freezing water undoubtedly splashed over him. The boat bucked like a wild animal beneath him. Yet, his breathing remained steady. The storm was unraveling the courage of hardened sailors, but it could not penetrate his perfect, divine peace.
The situation shifted from critical to fatal. The water inside the boat was up to their calves, and it was rising fast. The vessel was about to sink. In a matter of minutes, the wood would slip beneath the surface. They would all be dragged into the freezing, crushing depths. Peter looked toward the stern. His hands were blistered from the ropes. His eyes burned with salt and fear. A flash of lightning revealed the sleeping form of the master. A mixture of sheer terror and desperate indignation flared within the disciples. How could he sleep? How could he rest while they were seconds away from a violent death? Did he not care? They abandoned their buckets. They crawled over the flooded deck. They fought the violent pitching of the boat. They reached the stern. They fell upon him, grabbing his shoulders and shaking him violently. "Master! Master!" John screamed, his voice cracking with pure terror. "Teacher!" Peter roared over the howling wind. His face was inches from Jesus. "Do you not care that we are perishing? Save us, Lord, we are going to die." It was a cry echoing the deepest, most primal fear of humanity. It was the cry of the finite facing the infinite. The cry of the helpless staring into the void. Do you not care? Jesus opened his eyes. There was no startled response, no gasp of fear, no confusion. As he sat up, the lightning illuminated his face, while the disciples' faces were twisted in absolute panic. Jesus' face was perfectly composed. His eyes, deep and calm, took in the chaotic scene. The rushing water, the broken ropes, the terrified men. He did not immediately comfort them. He did not grab a bucket to help them bail water. He stood up. To stand on the deck of a small boat violently pitching in a storm is physically impossible. Yet Jesus rose to his feet. He balanced perfectly on the chaotic swaying wood. He stood in the stern. His soaked garments whipped violently around his frame. He looked straight into the heart of the darkness. He faced the howling wind. He faced the towering waves. And then he spoke. He did not shout in panic. He did not plead with the heavens. He spoke with absolute authority. The authority of a creator addressing his creation. His voice cut through the deafening roar of the tempest, clear and commanding. Peace. It was a rebuke to the wind. Be still. It was a command to the chaotic sea. A magnificent demonstration of peace. Be still. What happened next defied the laws of physics and meteorology. A storm of that magnitude takes hours to dissipate. Even if the wind stops, the water continues to churn with residual kinetic energy. But at the word of Christ, the wind didn't just die down. It ceased to exist. The screaming gale was instantly replaced by a profound, breathless silence. And the
Those towering black mountains of death collapsed instantly. The surface of the Sea of Galilee snapped into a state of absolute stillness, flat as glass. No ripples, no residual swell. The boat stopped pitching completely. It rested on water as flat and hard as a mirror. The silence that followed was heavier and more deafening than the storm. The only sound left was water dripping from the torn sail, and the ragged, shallow panting of 12 terrified men.
Jesus turned away from the bow. He looked down at his disciples. They were huddled on the flooded deck, shivering from the cold, staring at him with wide, unblinking eyes. The compassion in his voice was mingled with a profound sorrow. "Why are you so afraid?" he asked them quietly, his words echoing in the vast, sudden stillness of the night. "Have you still no faith?" He was not reprimanding them for being afraid of the storm. He was challenging their failure to recognize who was in the boat with them. They had seen him heal the sick. They had seen him cast out demons, seen him teach with unprecedented authority. Yet, in the face of nature's wrath, they had forgotten that the Lord of all creation was sleeping on a cushion, just a few feet away. The disciples did not answer his question. They couldn't. A new emotion swept over them, an emotion far deeper and more unsettling than the fear of drowning. The storm had terrified them because it was wild and deadly, but the man standing before them was more terrifying still. They looked at the perfectly still water. They looked at the motionless sail. Then they looked at Jesus. A cold, holy dread crept into their bones. The dread of facing the divine. They whispered to one another, their voices trembling with an earth-shattering realization. This realization is the core of the question. Who is this that even wind and sea obey him? Who then is this? They asked, their eyes locked on the Nazarene. Who is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? They had thought they were following a great rabbi, a prophet, perhaps the political messiah of Israel. But a prophet can only pray for the storm to stop. Only the Creator commands it. In that moment of absolute silence, the disciples realized one truth. They were sharing a small wooden boat with the living God. The rest of the journey was made in silence, a stunned, reverent silence. The disciples rowed across the glass-like surface of the lake, under a canopy of returning stars. The water that had threatened to become their tomb, it had now transformed into a peaceful pathway. When the bow of the boat touched the sand and pebbles of the Gerasene shore, they stepped out as completely changed men. This calming the storm audio story would echo through the centuries. It was whispered in the catacombs of Rome. It was preached in the magnificent cathedrals of Europe. And it is played as one of the most comforting Christian stories to fall asleep to for anyone facing their own dark, chaotic nights. It does not promise that storms will never come. The wind will howl, the boat will fill with water, and the night may sometimes seem hopelessly dark. Circumstances may scream that God is asleep, that he does not care that we are sinking. But the truth revealed on the Sea of Galilee is absolute. The one who rests at the stern is the master of the sea. And when the time is right, with a single word, he can bring perfect peace,
surpassing all understanding. Peace, be still. May the peace of Jesus Christ be with you tonight. Thank you for listening to these Bible audio stories from the living Messiah. Close your eyes, relax your soul, and drift into a deep sleep. Good night.